Hello, constituents of the Mega Republic. I'm your host, Lorrelion, and today we're talking about my Victoria 3 wish list. First, a quick little caveat here. You see, this list is just for fun. I don't expect Paradox to do necessarily any of this. This is just for fun, for speculation, and a lot of these things that I might mention are vague. If you have any idea on how to improve that vagueness, feel free to mention it in the comments section. Now, on to the main show. Click optimization. Let's dive into that right away. So, my first thing on this wish list is for greater improved click optimization. Now, that's not the most exciting or interesting thing, but if any of you have watched my previous videos, I've lost so many wars in EU4 because of shitty click optimization. What am I talking about? Well, let's look at EU4 here for a second. In EU4, if you have the development menu open up on the side where you can then select provinces and increase their development, you can't highlight or grab troops on the map. That's all fine and dandy, alright? But sometimes you happen to be involved in a war, and sometimes you look away for a second to improve development, and then all of a sudden you look back just to make sure, and suddenly you see you guys are under attack. Or there are enemies moving towards your guys. Now I play almost exclusively multiplayer, which means that it's rude for me to just pause the game, close that menu, as soon as I realize, oh shit, I can't click on them, and continue the game. Now, most of the time what I end up doing is I go, oh shit, I can't click on them, and by the time I realize, oh my god, you fucking idiot, you need to close this menu, it's too late. That menu takes up a small side of the screen. It's ridiculous. It's infuriating, it's frustrating. So I don't want you guys, if Paradox is listening, I know I just said I don't feel entitled and I hope that that doesn't, this is all just for fun. But if you're listening out there, click optimization. I know the games are very well keyboard optimized. Click optimization. I need to be able to select things and I need to be able to do it in a very fast way under the assumption that I can't just hit spacebar and pause the game. Now, I don't think anybody is going to sit here and say that the crisis system was amazing in Victoria 2. It was cool. It was very cool. Don't get me wrong. I like the idea. The implementation, however, was difficult. Oftentimes, in multiplayer, it wouldn't go off. There's just something wrong about it. Now, here's what I think should happen. I think we should still have a crisis system, but make it so that there's several crises at the same time, and you can still be in a war and be involved in another crisis, but make it so that essentially, like, regional powers in the area get to pick sides, and great powers could pick sides, is kind of what I'm thinking. These small crises that slowly escalate. They don't just immediately escalate, but could slowly escalate, or could quickly escalate, depending on the situation. But essentially, I like the idea of regional crises, and a crisis system that is useful to smaller nations. How I would fix that is a bunch of crises at once, make it so that they're a necessary mechanic in the game as opposed to just a sometimes thing that pops up every so often. So we need better written events and more events. I oftentimes in Victoria 2 felt as though a lot of the events, if I chose the opposite of what I was going for, that would be what I was getting in the choice. I mean, that's not necessarily true in all cases, but it just sort of felt a little weird that way. Also, Victoria 2 had a lot of too long did not read syndrome with some of these events. They weren't very easy to, especially if you're in a multiplayer game, and all I play is multiplayer. So you can understand from my perspective where a lot of these things are coming from. If you disagree with me and play single player all the time, that's cool, that's your choice. But when you're playing multiplayer, you want to be able to keep the game moving but still have flavor. And you can write very short, very impactful events, kind of like CK2 and EU4 actually have right now. So I fully expect this to be essentially the way of the future as to what happens in Victoria 2. In Victoria 3, rather. So I do think that the game needs a certain greater level of personality. And when I mean that, I mean characters and character development. I'd like to see the Kaiser Billy or the Tsar Nikki. I'd like to see those kinds of people, how they affect the game, because a lot of what motivated nations of this period of time was strangely character driven. And I think Victoria 2 loses something by not having that. Now, I don't mean that the game should be as character-centric and focused as Crusader Kings. In fact, far from it. I think that would actually detract from the game a little bit if I knew who the cousin of my wife's bastard was. Like, that's irrelevant to me. But if you are going to include people and characters, I don't want them to just be modifiers. I want them to have personality, and you can bring that out through events. You can bring that out a little bit through modifiers, but mostly through events, and having them have the ability to interact in the world. Like, it'd be cool if you could have your president or your king or whatever personally befriend a faction leader. And then suddenly that faction is out there saying, hey, this guy's a good guy, he's pushing for equal rights or whatever. I think that would bring a lot to the game. Picture, if you will, a small African nation that is allied and under the sphere of influence of France. And now picture, if you will, an adjacent small African nation that is under the influence of Spain. Now, if those two go to war, and those two, how should that affect France and Spain? Like, should there be French troops marching into Madrid? I feel like the people of France wouldn't care that much. There needs to be some sort of system for non-European wars, and I know in Victoria 1 there was this concept of colonial wars. Now, I didn't play enough Victoria 1 to really know or understand them well enough to present them as something that I think, oh, this should be in the new game. But I do think there should be some level of escalation of wars instead of just immediate. There should be border skirmishes. There should be border skirmishes, and there should be proxy wars between big regional powers that are heavily funded by these external big European sources, to the point that maybe even those external big European sources could rent guys in there. Almost kind of like in Hearts of Iron, how you can send expeditionary forces. Actually, a system kind of like that wouldn't be that bad. But I'd also like to see, like, a French colony and a Spanish colony sort of square off in the middle of nowhere without France and Spain going entirely into a massive enveloping war that destroys both of them. Unless I'm playing Germany. But my point still stands. Now you're probably sitting here wondering, why am I smacking down on militancy equaling reform, equaling social reform? People get angry, they want social reform, it sort of makes sense, right? Now, here's my issue with it. I do believe that every single game needs a recovery mechanic, a way that a player who's shit down on his luck can recover from damnation. And I think that in Victoria 2, militancy was supposed to be that recovery mechanic. The thing is, and this is if you're playing multiplayer, it's so important to just get these reforms as soon as possible so you can have that army that you need and want as soon as possible, that if you're not raising militancy, you're grossly mismanaging until you get all these social reforms, and then you gotta stop. You're grossly mismanaging your country. And that just seems weird to me. Like, you shouldn't strive to create a shitty country so you can create a better one. Yes, I get that sometimes a few eggs need to be broken to make a good omelet, but you really should not be striving to break those eggs. Now, is this Paradox's fault? No, this is entirely us players, and I'm very guilty of this, not being able to hold back. However, I think that perhaps a different system to base reforms off of, particularly one where you can sort of set it in motion when it comes down to without necessarily involving constant rebels, I think that would be the way to go. And yes, in the game as it currently is, you could become socialist and push reforms through that way. But that process doesn't appeal to a lot of people, mostly because socialism in that game is not the greatest, because it's not pro-war. And especially in multiplayer settings, a lot of things have to focus on the war, control, and power. Now, again, that's not necessarily Paradox's fault. That's the way the community has chosen to play. But perhaps it might not be a bad idea for Paradox to look into it. Now, the idea of a recovery mechanic is mostly a multiplayer one. I like the idea of... Let's take a look at... let's compare Civilizations to Crusader Kings. In Crusader Kings... Well, in Civilizations, let's start out with that. In Civilizations, if someone gets stronger than me, they're always going to be stronger than me. The game just sort of goes up and up and up and up exponentially. We look at a game like EU4, you've got revanchism, which is ideally using sort of a game statistic as a recovery mechanic. It's not necessarily a skill-based. Civilizations, you don't have any sort of recovery mechanic. And let's look at Crusader Kings 2 now here for a second. In Crusader Kings 2, I see somebody I don't like, I can assassinate them. I can start assassinating people underneath them. I can mess with them very hard. I can marry and suddenly get huge swaths of land. I can do all these things that if I'm down on my luck, I can use to turn my game around. And because of that, it's not necessarily, you don't look good if you rage quit when you can always build back up. And if you are in a game without a recovery mechanic and someone starts to pull ahead, sometimes you start to feel like, why bother? Now, Victoria 2, I'm a huge, any of the Paradox games, I'm a huge fan of multiplayer on. So that's why I'd like to see some sort of skill-based mechanic, not necessarily, again, the assassinations and marriage and stuff, that stuff's not gonna work in the Victoria 3 theme. Maybe some level of espionage or more interesting and dynamic economy. Actually, like an amazing economy might be a cool recovery mechanic. Or what you could do is you could make different you know how you've got the population, the pops? You could make some of them better than others. Like if you have a small population, you should be able to Prussianize that population and just make it better, stronger, smarter than everybody else out there, and put you on essentially an equal footing and harder working. And I'm not saying that Prussian people are better. Yeah. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that a government with, especially like a European government with a smaller population, might focus a little bit more on making that population more skilled. And I think this point goes with everything that I've sort of been saying. I want there to be more ways to mess with people. Spies, messing with their economy. God, there's definitely some other ways to do it. Talk about it in the comments. Like, it's just what I want to see. I want subterfuge. I want secrets. I want there to be like secret alliances and stuff. I want more ways to mess with people. Do I even need to explain this one? I mean, you all know. You all know. So you spend about 50 to 70% of the game at peace. You need more to do during that time than spend it staring at the computer screen. Now, Victoria 2 sort of took care of that by giving you, I guess, a busy mechanic, and that would be clicking and building factories and constantly clicking the upgrade button on each individual factory. That's cool and all, but what would be more interesting is more in-depth ways of running your country, because again, you're sitting there for most of the game just sort of staring at the screen. Maybe if you're playing multiplayer like I do, you're making deals with other people. Maybe if you're playing single player, you're playing at speed 5. But still, you spend a lot of time without anything to do. The game needs a few more mechanics, which would be very nice to see. And I'm not exactly sure what they are or what they would be. So if you've got any ideas, feel free to leave a comment down below. And as always, remember to be a hero to the Republic by liking and subscribing. I will see you next time.